means rabbi, my teacher. Magdalene goes to the disciples with news, I have seen the Lord. What does this story mean? I don't believe anybody just made up this story. One thing, on the night before and on the day of Jesus' crucifixion, the disciples, out of fear, left Jesus, and Peter denied that he even knew him. Some went back to fishing and their previous businesses, but they came back to being disciples. Only the resurrection would have given them the conviction to come back. They lost their businesses, their reputations, their families, their personal well-being, and even their lives for the testimony that they ate and drank with Jesus after he rose from the dead. There's no other explanation for their claim. Secondly, the tomb was discovered empty by a woman. Women occupied so low a rung on the Jewish social ladder that the testimony of a woman was considered worthless. If the disciples wanted to create a more believable story, they would have had men discover the tomb. The evidence is that the story was exactly as it happened. And the third thing, the empty tomb story is the oldest part of the Christian message that we have. Nothing is older. Easter is the oldest holiday of the Christian church. Nothing is older than Easter. The early tradition of Easter existed long before the Gospels were written. Paul speaks of the resurrection. Paul was writing in the 60s. The Gospels weren't written until the 80s, 90s, and early 100s. The Gospels are not the earliest message we have. Paul is. And Paul speaks of the resurrection 30 years after Christ was raised. Paul was influential. He was an intelligent rabbi who staked and gave up his life because he was convinced that Jesus was buried and lived again. The resurrection story changed lives in the ancient world, and it changes lives today. Weak, cowardly disciples became strong adherents in the early church. A vicious persecutor of the early church became a gentle follower of the Christ. A woman with 7 demons became the apostle to the apostles. The surprise of the Easter morning that Jesus was alive is just as shocking as it would be today, as if someone in their casket rose up and walked out of the funeral home. Easter. Recently, an article in a computer magazine concerned little surprises that the designers of software sneak into their products. Some of the examples are funny, like the message hidden in one of them, I'm being held prisoner in a software factory. Some are meant to entertain us, like a hidden pinball game embedded in Microsoft 97, and a hidden virtual picture of mountain peaks and blue skies in Excel 97. Do you know what these little hidden surprises are called? Easter eggs.
Easter eggs.
Easter eggs. I love it. The resurrection is real, but we cannot separate it from the cross. But the cross is not the final word. The final word is that lives are changed. If we can only believe that change is possible, even in the lives of people today who are tormented by demons, not the demons of the ancient world, the demons of our world: alcohol, drugs, sexual addiction, all kinds of addictions, alienation from families, even nations that are alienated from each other. All it takes is a realization that the resurrection is possible. In the winter of 1982, Vice President then George Bush the Elder, the father of the current president, represented the United States at the funeral of former Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev. Bush was deeply moved by the silent protest carried out by Brezhnev's widow. She stood motionless at the coffin until just before it was closed. Then, just as the soldiers touched the lid of the casket, the wife performed an act of great courage and hope. This was the communist years. A gesture that was surely ranked as one of the most profound acts of civil disobedience. She reached down and made the sign of the cross on Brezhnev's chest. There, in that citadel of communist atheism, the wife of the man who had run it all hoped that her husband was wrong. She was convinced that there was another life, and that life was represented by Jesus, who had died on the cross, and that same Jesus could have and would have mercy on Leonid. The cross is not the final word. Our crosses, whatever they are not the final word. There is one who was resurrected, and so may we be. Because of the resurrection, we see Mary Magdalene differently. We see the disciples differently. We see the cross differently. And we see death differently. Death is not the final answer. Because Jesus was resurrected, we can be also. The message that we have been waiting for all our lives has been received this day. The tomb is empty. Our tombs are empty. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Amen.